to the Weekend Box. Jeff is also a founder of Psychedelia Magazine, a great publication if you have not had a chance to read it. Thank you guys so much for being here. And my name is Amanda Siebert. I'm a journalist and author. I've written 2 books. One of them is called The Little Book of Cannabis, How Marijuana Can Improve Your Life. And my latest book is called Psyched, 7 Cutting-Edge Psychedelics Changing the World. So I'm very happy to be here. All right, so celebrity endorsements. Let's get into it. My first question will be for you, Los. What are the factors people growing their brands need to look for when they're considering a celebrity or influencer to help them market their brand?
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Such a pleasure. This is home for me, so it's always special to be back in the 305. So thank you for being here and to share the energy. Yeah. I think the word that comes to mind, Amanda, is authenticity. I mean, that's the driver, period. Early on in cannabis, you saw some the green rush energy. You're right, everybody thought it was going to be easy. Celebrities lined up to do deals. Operators were quick to crown on that. And, for the most part, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be money falling for the skies for everybody. And that did not happen. And what you saw, and to some extent continue to see, are relationships in the quote-unquote celebrity and celebrity-adjacent realm that do not work. There's probably far more examples of failed partnerships than successful ones, and I like to focus on the positive. I'm a sunny side-up kind of guy. I think an example of one that has worked really well is Viola and Al Harrington and his brand in the cannabis space specifically. If you notice, the name of the brand is not Al Harrington. It's Viola. And there's a story to it, really predicated on his experience with his grandmother and her journey with cannabis, through her illness, and how that inspired him to not only embrace the plant for her benefit at that time, but how that also informed his journey as a professional. And I'm lucky enough to call him a friend and a colleague, and that is a best-in-class example of how to do it correctly. It's about meaningful involvement, expectations that are aligned, shared values, and really seeing something through from beginning to end in that way, and running a business. The cannabis consumer, and I would say that this is very true for psychedelics as well, they're sophisticated. They see through just the veneer of, a name on a jar of flour. That's not going to cut it. So cannabis brands would be wise to really view it through that lens, and celebrities as well. And if you could really align those values, there are examples like Al and Viola that really work. But, we could also spend some time talking about some of the ones that haven't, but we'll stay positive for now.
Absolutely. So what I'm picking up there is the value of authenticity. Folks are going to be able to see through stuff. I know I do. And also the value of, separating your celebrity name from your brand as well. My next question is going to be for Jeff. Jeff, what are some requirements and restrictions with regard to celebrity endorsements? Where I live in Canada, actually, celebrity endorsements are completely not allowed, so it's always a kick for me when I come to the US and I see all of these celebrity brands.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Well, first I'd like to say that everything we say, of course I'm the lawyer up here, or one of the 2 lawyers up here, so I have to get this out, is nothing is meant as legal or medical advice. Retain a lawyer, consult with a doctor for those types of things. This is just discussion purposes only. There, I said it. By the way, it does depend on jurisdiction, Amanda. I mean, obviously Canada has very tough restrictions with regard to celebrity endorsements. And people have tried to get around them with limited success, in my experience, but you just don't do it there. But I did talk to my colleagues at our law firm who have helped work with these regulations with a lot of our clients for a roadmap of the types of issues that will come up. Now, the biggest thing is in the U.S. is the FTC. And you have to make sure that when you're talking about a product, that any claims that you make, whether it's through some sort of advertisement or testimonial, it must be substantiated. And when they're health claims, they're brought under more rigorous scrutiny, and the standard is competent and reliable scientific evidence. competent and reliable scientific evidence, which is a high standard. And for me, especially with psychedelics, there's been so many promising studies. They've been looking at these things, but still compared to what the scientific community likes to see, these things are still relatively new and don't have a lot of studies behind them compared to other substances because of the cultural issues surrounding these things, languishing for so long on Schedule 1. But you do have to pass that test if you're going to make those health claims. Also, you have to be truthful. Anything that the celebrity says, it's examined as if the advertiser would have said it. If the advertiser it would have been deceptive from the advertiser, it's deceptive. You can't get through it by putting it through a celebrity spokesman, through a testimonial or some sort of less formal thing. They're still held to the same requirement. Another thing is if there's any connection between the endorser and the company controlling the brand, it has to be disclosed. You have to draw out that connection so that the audience is aware of it. And those are the primary things. But when you're looking at a lot of other jurisdictions, a lot of other things come up. List, I'm going to run through it really quickly. Has to be 21. Most of the time, you're going to run into jurisdictions, they have to be 21. Obviously, no misleading claims. Sometimes there's a social responsibility. Sometimes there's endorsements must promote responsible use and avoid glamorizing or excessive consumption. Some states or jurisdictions have things that are similar to the prohibitions that you would see that you're used to on alcohol and especially tobacco. So you have to look and make sure that wherever you're advertising, that you're not running afoul of these local regulations, disclosing the connections, and sometimes you have to balance the promotion of the product with social responsibility. Some of the things that the FTC has been doing, and I think a lot of you may have heard back in May of 2021, the FTC cracked down and has been cracking down on CBD. And there tends to be more of these actions on CBD than on cannabis. And my understanding, the explanation I was given, is because once you start talking about interstate commerce, the FTC starts getting more interested. Whereas those things that stay strictly within one state, sometimes they can evade scrutiny in that sense. But just last week, actually January 26th, last week, the FDA has concluded that a new regulatory pathway is needed for CBD that needs to balance access with risks. So this is very new, so that they're going to be treating CBD differently than they have been. And also, on the same day, January 26th, the FTC denied 3 citizen petitions that had asked the agency to conduct rulemaking to allow the marketing of CBD products as dietary supplements. And the FTC shot that down, and that was just very recent. But those are just some of the things to watch for. But you do have to be very careful because it is very easy to run afoul of these laws, and the more successful your business becomes, the more scrutiny you're going to draw.
Thank you, Jeff. So lots of rules, lots of restrictions, and they vary depending on what state you're in. Lots to pay attention there if that's something you're considering. So Lizzie, I want to pose this next question to you. Can you talk a little bit about what legal requirements people should keep in mind when they're entering into license deals in the cannabis space?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. And this is kind of going off of what Jeff said. So there's the federal level that you need to keep in mind, but also when you're in the cannabis space, you really need to pay attention to the state regs because each state regulates cannabis a little bit differently, even if they have similar intent and similar rules and regulations. It's really important to understand where you're going to be advertising, what the different cannabis level advertising regulations are. So I'm from Colorado. For instance, in Colorado, you have a requirement to have some sort of evidence to show that where you're advertising, the majority of the public that's going to be seeing it or listening to it or hearing it is over the age of 21. And our marijuana enforcement division can ask you to produce this evidence. So if you advertise in a magazine, you should request from that magazine, hey, we need some reader data. Are most of your readers over the age of 21? And that would be for just a basic endorsement deal where you're dealing with a celebrity that's coming in, they're endorsing the product. when you have like a next level where if a celebrity or an endorser in general wants to have some sort of royalty interest associated with the endorsement, then now you're looking at financial interest, and there's every state deals with that differently, and there's certain disclosure requirements, some mandatory, some discretionary, and then even a next level on top of that would be if the endorser or celebrity, if they want to enter into a joint venture and they want to create a brand, or if they want equity interest in the brand in exchange for their endorsement, then you're looking at ownership regulations, which again are different across all the states. And one thing to keep in mind is that the endorser or celebrity has to be eligible to hold a license. So like I said, like I'm gonna beat a dead horse with this, but every state's different, so you need to understand what the state says in connection with whether they're eligible to even hold a license before you even start discussions of providing them with equity as compensation. And so I guess what to take away from it is that there's no one size fits all for celebrity or just endorsements in general. And so it's key to understand where the advertisement or the endorsements are going to be seen. Social media is a whole new beast, so it's seen everywhere. But being cognizant of the FTC guidelines, and they actually have social media policies, and they have recommendations for influencers and what you need to say on social media, how you should disclose your relationships. So in addition to a contract and a relationship not being the same for every state or for every type of relationship that you want to build with an endorsement or endorser, it's also important that the brand sets some guidelines. So it's sort of a best practice to say, this is what we prefer you do and not do. Not that an endorser is always going to follow that, but for a business owner, this is, as Los was saying, this should really be treated as a business relationship. It's important to cross your T's and dot your I's and make sure that you have some sort of documentation that, like, this is our policy, these are our best practices, this is what, we don't want to run afoul of state or, federal law, even though we all know that cannabis is federally illegal, at least not run afoul of FTC regulations. So those are just some things to keep in mind. And again, it's really state specific, so it's hard to dive into too many details, but understanding that that's an element that you need to keep in mind is an important step when you're building these relationships.
So it sounds like depending on the type of business relationship, there's different sort of sets of rules that each party has to sort of abide by. Los, I want to pose this next question to you, and you sort of touched on this earlier, that not all partnerships are good. They don't all work. So what should people be mindful of to avoid the wrong kind of partnership?
Well, shared values, I think, is the foundation of the relationship. It's got to be more than just a publicity grab. The ones that I have seen that have worked, there's a genuine love and appreciation from the celebrity side to not just make money and get their name out there more, but really move the movement forward. A genuine care and love of plant medicine. And I have run across, again, staying on the sunny side of things, a lot of celebrities that really do care. And it's awesome. And cannabis, I think, is so important insofar as succeeding as an industry, because if you think about it, and here we are at Canadelic, so I think this point of view perhaps is quite apropos. Cannabis is the tip of the spear, and mainstreaming the dialogue, conversation, and perhaps the lexicon of the greater conversation about plant medicine at large. And I would say that the success of the cannabis industry to date, notwithstanding its challenges, celebrity and otherwise, has begetted a lot of the progress that we're seeing on the psychedelic side in terms of normalization and acceptance. And let's face it, celebrities have large platforms, by and large. So at the very least, even if per se partnerships and alignments don't always work out, at least there's a conversation happening, and it's bringing it more into the fore, and that's a really good thing. So I think that's something to be mindful of. And I think really just laying down those shared values, realizing achievable goals as partners and business people, from the operator side, which is where I've come into that equation in my personal experience. What are you really looking to forward as a business, and how does that fit into your own strategy? That's crucial. In my company, I was fortunate enough to partner with Tommy Hilfiger some time ago, and what was interesting about that partnership, and when I first met him and his organization, was they had an interest in supply chain. I mean, next to no interest whatsoever in marketing sort of the eponymous nature of his apparel brand. I found that to be fascinating. It was quite different than, some other celebrities that I had run across my path, and that really caught my interest. And what I learned as I got deeper into that specific relationship was there was a real organization there. And the other sort of energy that emanated was an interest in finding a confluence between cannabis and fashion. And that really interested me because I think people consume cannabis in a manner that's analogous to how they consume fashion, and even music for that example. It's about the trends very often and what's next and what's sort of the moment. And I think that's a really fascinating sort of area to focus on, and that's what we're doing in my relationship. If we ever put out Tommy Hilfiger Cannabis, something went wrong.
Good to know. Thank you. You said a couple of things there that I really liked. One, the idea of cannabis being the tip of the spear, sort of at the front leading the charge. I love that. I'm going to borrow that and use that in conversation. Yeah, that's really brilliant. You also said something about how celebrity endorsements, what they do is they open up a conversation. And I think that's really important to stress because a lot of people, as you mentioned earlier, people who smoke cannabis or consume it or do psychedelics, we're a little bit critical, And so reiterating that point that it's about starting conversations, opening up conversations, not whether or not you like Mike Tyson or whatever. Yeah, it's about the conversation. So thank you for saying that. My next question is, I'm going to pose this to all of you. So what influence does content such as cannabis and psychedelics in documentaries or stuff we're seeing on Netflix, what does that have on the respective industries?
I think that this really is a nice segue from what you were just speaking about and how it's important to start conversations. And I think that some, celebrities and even influencers who are out there in the world, if they're having these conversations, then they have an impact on people that are listening and normalizing it a bit more, making the connection between mental health and psychedelics and cannabis use. And I like that the cannabis is the tip of the spear because cannabis is so much more prevalent, even though it's fragmented across the U.S. and psychedelics, if you're looking specifically in like a regulatory framework and access, you've got Oregon and Colorado kind of leading the charge, but it's still pretty early. But I really applaud some of the celebrities that have that want to come out and share their story and that are being vulnerable in a moment and saying this was my struggle and this is what helped me. I think helps us start this conversation or build on the conversation.
Yeah, I don't think it's not just documentaries either. Like with who's seen 12 Strangers or something? What's that one? Yeah. Where everyone, a few of you. I know there's a documentary about Lamar Odom. So there's a lot of different media pieces that play into this. What about you, Jeff? Do you have any thoughts on how media influences this and the effect they have on each other?
With regard to the documentaries, especially the ones on Netflix, I think they're fantastic. I love it because they're entertaining and informative. Some are more fun than informative, but they all have something to deliver, I think. And anything about changing the culture to me is you're getting right at the root of the problem because culture, the wrong culture, has been what I think's fed the war on drugs and the Controlled Substances Act from the beginning was a culture war. And the Nixon administration going after its enemies. And I think that these things are incredibly helpful in every aspect of the industry just to get people to see this information and what these substances do and not in the context of these are bad. I was raised as a Roman Catholic. So I was afraid to try anything. I didn't try anything, and I thought these things were bad. And I had friends trying them. I went to a liberal college and everything, and I just thought, why would you take something that would change your mind or alter your mind? And it just didn't make any sense to me. And even though I've gotten away from that, that emotional aspect of that reluctance, it's never going to leave me. But to me, these things that go to the culture and go towards opening people's mind and letting them take a new look at it, I think that they're imperative. And like I said, I think it helps every aspect of the industry.
I agree with that. And Fantastic Fungi. I mean, my goodness.
Great film.
You understand how the mycelium are connected. Like, talk about a mirror to humanity. And to your point, Jeff, substantive, bringing forth perspectives. And Michael Pollan, the work that he's done and demonstrating breakthroughs and demographics that people be like, wow, that person this is what we need. And I would posit that has very little to do with celebrity. It has to do with truth.
Yes.
I mean, at its core, the celebrity stuff is fun. It's a microphone, and we're all celebrities in a certain right. We're all here talking about something that is near and dear to our hearts, and at the core of the human experience, we have a relationship with these substances. And as this is coming to the fore, it's about the truth of that, and that kernel is eternal. It's not going anywhere. It's been around for a long time, and all this stuff helps.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the overlap between celebrity and documentaries. This question is for Jeff. If someone does a documentary or a short film about psychedelics or about cannabis, does that count as a celebrity endorsement? Why or why not?
Sometimes you get a question that really brings out your view of the world and how you see it, and this is one of those questions because my answer is treat it like an endorsement. The FTC, their policy on it is they don't care where the endorsement is. It could be online, in mail, wherever, and if you put an endorsement in a documentary, but the person there is connected with the company, is getting paid by the company, even if they're not getting paid to do that specific documentary, if they're a paid endorser and they're there plugging the product, I would treat it like an endorsement, and I would go through the same process, the same boring, absurd, ridiculous process that I already went through before that I won't bore you with again, but you have to look at all the regulations, where it's going to be, and you treat it like an endorsement because the FTC doesn't care. And again, the more successful you are, the more likely you're going to be to bring scrutiny in on yourself. Make sure that you disclose that endorsement. Make sure that it is truthful. Every aspect of advertising, I would use it, and make sure that you follow the rules because they will come after you.
Wow, I did not know that. So even if someone were to just say, psychedelics or improve my life in some way, shape, or form, that would sort of,
Well, keep in mind,
or
people will,
specific to a brand.
one of the ways that they want to advertise to you, anyone, and not because they're devious, it's just normal. They don't want it to seem like they're advertising. They're just sharing information. And so people will try and present it. You have infomercials disguised as documentaries, and we know what they are, and consumers are fairly sophisticated now. But there's a reason why they present the information that way, and there's a reason why the FTC wants to see you disclose that connection. And so, if you're a paid endorser and you say, oh, I can go on this documentary and just wear my branded product and talk about how much I love it because I'm not getting paid to do this, and you think you can get around those, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for scrutiny. You're asking for the FTC to look into you. And in my opinion, they're going to be treating it like an endorsement.
Thank you. Good to know. My next question, Los, for you. So you mentioned, we touched on this, pardon me, earlier a little bit about fashion and music and cannabis. So when we compare celebrity endorsements in cannabis to celebrity endorsements in these other industries, how are they consumed in the cannabis space? How is it a little bit different than these other industries, or is it the same?
Yeah, good question. I feel like it seems to be like a real natural affinity between celebrity and cannabis, just culturally, and I think it's just the music and the way that we've always been sort of in relationship with that plant specifically. I think the notion of celebrity will have far less impact in psychedelics, and I think that makes sense if somebody's going to an ayahuasca ceremony and thinking about, a celebrity endorsement or something, you're probably not coming from the right place, right? Like
I would agree.
So it's sort of just, it's not apples and apples, which I think is a good thing. And, again, I think, not to belabor it, but I feel like just the share of voice is a positive thing, at a high level. and ultimately, whether it's cannabis or psychedelics, I think it comes down to the relationship that one is seeking for themselves with those substances and what that's doing for them, and that doesn't have anything to do with anybody but yourself at the end of the day, right? So there's some differences, but I think the share of voice is a commonality that's positive.
Awesome, absolutely. So Jeff, question for you about what happens when endorsements go bad? What happens when, yeah, what happens?
You call Jeff Zuber.
Yeah. What happens when they don't work? Yeah.
Yes. Well,
Call
well,
Jeff.
obviously business-wise, maybe you don't juice your product. Maybe, you don't get the return you want. Maybe you spent so much and you needed this to work and it's devastating to your business altogether. But I think you're talking about, the other consequences. And yes, you could be investigated by the FTC. They could initiate a lawsuit against you. That in itself is expensive. But you think about the goal of the advertising. The fact that the FTC is publicly pursuing you, has instigated an investigation, has actually sued you, can be a problem if they ultimately win or if they ultimately fine you. You're getting fined for deceptive advertising. Excuse me. So obviously that is completely counterproductive. It's some of the worst advertising you can get to get hit with something misleading advertising from the FTC. So you want to definitely try and avoid that. But usually with the right advice, you can come up with advertising that works, that doesn't fall afoul of the law. You can. But it's difficult to have those conversations, and I can tell you that the lawyers here have been, the lawyers are like the buzzkill. If you have an in-house lawyer, they're the buzzkills. They're the ones that are telling you how to not have fun, And then you have the other side, the business, that just wants to do everything and saying, we're not lying, why can't we do this? And there's always that push and pull between the lawyers and the business people, trying to, the business people wanting to bring in that revenue as much as possible, and the lawyers wanting to avoid that more distant liability that's going to eat into that revenue stream as well. And so you always have that push and pull. But it can be very, very counterproductive if you're short-sighted, because, again, it's not just the legal fees, it's not just the fines, it's having the weight of that decision and of the FTC or that ruling against you. That's it should be taken seriously.
And just to kind of add to that in terms of, not to be the voice of doom and gloom, but when you're entering into these different relationships and everything's very exciting at the beginning, it's really important when you're discussing like the terms of the contract to cover what would happen if like y'all divorced, you don't want to be in a partnership anymore, you don't want to do this with each other. I mean, an operating agreement in my eyes for a limited liability company is like an organizational prenup. You figure out what happens when you guys want to break up. It's hard conversations, but it makes it easier to have them at the beginning than have them at the point of breakup where you're like, now what do we do? So I think one of the things to keep in mind when you are starting to build these relationships is that there will be hard conversations, and maybe you can just punt it to your lawyer to have that hard conversation so you don't have to have it with a celebrity and kind of bring down the excitement and the momentum. But I would add that to as an important, not fun.
I could really kill the passion for a product that a celebrity might have talking to me, but I'm a litigator. I'm not the person that puts these deals together. Lizzie does that and other attorneys at my firm. I happen to handle litigation, but if it were up to me in terms of these contracts, I'd have everything that the celebrity is doing with regard to promoting the product run through our department. In fact, I would prefer that our people do the initial social media posts. Say you're going to do 5 social media posts a month, and they're going to come through here, and you can have input into it, but ultimately it's going to come out from us. I would put as many controls on it as possible, and not just having them fire away like Donald Trump on Twitter, when he's allowed on Twitter, But you have to be, you have to be. It would be much more managed if it were up to me. But obviously, sometimes you can't get it. I mean, just because a lawyer says it's good for you doesn't mean that a celebrity or anyone is going to agree to be micromanaged like that.
Gotcha. So 2 major takeaways: organizational prenup, and if that fails, call Jeff Zuber. Question for you, Lizzie. With the emerging psychedelic industry in Oregon, what kind of endorsements and advertisements can we expect to see in that state?
I think Oregon in general is kind of off to a slow start. I think that there's a lot of factors, and we're talking about the Oregon Psilocybin Services Program for everyone. And a little bit of background, I'm not sure how much everyone knows. I'm sure that there's like a panel on the regulations, but just a little bit of background that the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act was passed in 2020, and it took 2 years to get to where we are now. Also, it provided for local jurisdictions to opt out at a statewide election, general election, which was this past November. So a lot of people, while we knew kind of what locations may or may not be okay with having psilocybin businesses, we were really waiting until after the November election to see, like, for sure where you could open a business, especially if you're looking at purchasing property. You didn't want to kind of jump the gun on that. That being said, the application process is pretty slow from what I understand from the get-go, and most of the applications are being kicked back for being incomplete. So I see this as it's going to take a while. So I don't see that there's going to be, excuse me, a lot of celebrity endorsement from the get-go. And if it would be, it would potentially be connected with a service center or a manufacturer or some sort of product. But in the Oregon regs, they have similar restrictions on advertising that they do for cannabis. So in terms of like your audience, and you can't say things that would be attractive to children and things like that. But I'm not sure it's going to really open up like cannabis did, and we'll see. Colorado's next on the list for having a psilocybin program. Well, actually, a natural medicine, because Colorado's starting with psilocybin and then opening the door in a few years to some other natural medicines. So it should be interesting to see what that looks like. And I think the Colorado model, I feel like we don't have regs yet, so this is just speculation from me, but I think there might be more retreat-style businesses in Colorado, so long as the state legislators and the Department of Regulatory Agencies, who's going to be governing it, don't screw things up. I see that it might be a retreat style, and so maybe that would open the door for some celebrities, or even not even necessarily a celebrity, but someone that has a passion for the natural medicine to say, hey, I want to come to Colorado and open up my retreat, which is going to offer yoga, X, Y, and Z, and also psilocybin services. So I think it's a long way away, but I think, maybe not as much in Oregon, but potentially in Colorado, just how the different laws are written. And we'll see what happens in Colorado as the regulations are drafted in the next year and a half.
Awesome, thank you. So potentially some retreat endorsements. It's probably too early to say, but that's good to know. Los, a question for you. You have experience with international brands. Can you share with the audience how celebrity endorsements differ in different countries?
Each country, each state, pretty much, it's its own situation. So I've done deals in Canada and other places, and you mentioned your own experience from being from Canada.
So boring.
Yeah, it's there's ways around it, and it's structural, and you get creative consulting rubrics and things like this, but different places have different rules. So I think just at the end of the day, as a business operator and as a celebrity on that side of things, you just have to sort of see if the juice is worth the squeeze. Mm-hmm. And if it makes sense, and what does it look like to actually comply? What are those regulatory hurdles? How does it pencil? What are the goals of the partnership? And ultimately, on the consumer side, are people in that jurisdiction or territory even going to respond to a celebrity endorsement per se? That's a sort of jurisdiction by jurisdiction analysis, and it weighs differently. I feel like where I operate, mostly in California, that there's room to play in that lane, and you can get creative there and make it work, but you just got to really look at it state by state and country by country is sort of a high-level thought on it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been interesting to see some of the creativity around that, how celebrities have become owners of companies or, fought their way on as advisors or something so that they can not endorse, quote unquote, but be associated with the industry. So thank you for that note on international brands and endorsements. Final thoughts on this subject from our panelists. What are we thinking as we look ahead? I mean, we talked a little bit about psychedelics. What do you see happening in the next year or two as far as celebrity branding in these two areas?
Well, I think that the regulations are going to take a track similar to other products because they often do. Lawyers are not original thinkers, and it's good in a certain way that there's some consistency amongst the industries. One thing that will always be important is to make sure that when you're doing these deals, that you get someone like Lizzie or just a great deal attorney together because at the beginning it's always a love fest, and you think everything's going to work out, and you get a bare bones template, and you think you're good, and sometimes you just don't go through things, and you're dealing with eccentric personalities, CEOs, celebrities, all the people involved, and things go wrong. When you're dealing with a celebrity, you're bringing the celebrity on board because of their fame, of the fact that they're going to bring some attention to the product. And like you said, Amanda, sometimes these deals involved the celebrity getting an ownership piece. And you have to think of how is that going to look in 5 years, in 10 years, assuming they're successful. Is the celebrity still going to be a celebrity? Is there going to be a morality clause in there? And what does that morality clause mean in the context of this particular celebrity? For instance, if there's no clause and the celebrity gets arrested for a gun charge or something, and you say, okay, we want out of this deal, this is looking bad, and the celebrity says, what about my 4 prior arrests before we did the deal? So it's best to work out these things with people who have gone through these things before and know how the road lies. Because if you give short shrift to these deals, especially if you're giving away a piece of your company, you're going to regret it.
I'm going to go back to my organizational prenup, just to understand that there's some, to make sure that everyone's aligned and their interests are aligned. And I think that's one thing when, not necessarily when you're like picking who to endorse your product, but you should have, your goals should be aligned, like kind of going to what Los has been talking about, that it's really important to find someone that has your similar passion, and then, maybe let the lawyers have the yucky conversations and the hard conversations that no one wants to have, because you want to keep that momentum going, but you also want to be realistic and understand that if things do go a certain way, that having a contract that anticipates what the parties' obligations are is really important, and understanding that there will be things that you can and can't do based on the state regs. So it's important to have someone come in and even just look over a contract and say, red flag for this state reg, red flag for here, just to make sure that you're starting the relationship as best as you can, and also, keeping your momentum at the same time. So having someone on your side is helpful that knows the state-by-state regs. And I'm really excited for what Colorado and Oregon are going to do, not necessarily in the celebrity endorsement world, because I'm a regulation junkie, so I like getting into the regs, and I think it's important that people pay attention to how the regulations are being drafted, and I think that public comment is important, and I think that attending these meetings and helping guide the regulators, because the Department of Regulatory Authorities doesn't necessarily know how to regulate psilocybin services, so we need to contribute and have our voice heard in order to have a program that is actually going to work. So I think that's really important for what's coming up, and I'm excited for that.
Received. My personal opinion is, and I think to a certain extent we're already there, celebrity endorsements will be less and less important going forward. I think a lot of people just don't care. And the relationships that will matter will be those that have meaningful involvement, and that's palpable and comes through, and there's a real value proposition there that people can connect with on a more real level. That's always going to be welcome, and I hope to see more of that. But yeah, personally, and if there was a day where nobody talked about celebrities at all and the conversation was just focused on the medicine and what it's doing for each other and bringing people together, a lot of the celebrity stuff, just to say this, I feel it's almost like idolatry. These are normal people. These are just normal people with all the same traumas and different things that we all have in this room. And once, I guess when I started dealing with enough of them, I had that breakthrough for myself. I'm like, wow, this person's more messed up than me. So it normalizes it in that way, and if we get to a point that nobody talks about celebrity quotient at all, and it's just about the medicine, I think that'd be a good thing. And we're probably pretty close to being there.
Sorry, I have two mics and neither of them work. Thank you. I totally agree with you. Honestly, celebrity endorsements every time I hear about them, I kind of have to hesitate from rolling my eyes a little bit. But you know, it is really about the conversation. So on that note, we have a few minutes left. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to pose a question to one of our panelists? Can you project your voice?
I, I would say we've been creative historically with the different deals, so there's not a structure that works for everyone. And again, not legal advice, but there's, if depending where the IP of your business, where the brand is held, if you, have an endorsement scenario relationship with that entity rather than the license holding entity, sometimes that would be helpful in less red tape, less disclosures. But if there's a relationship between the IP holding company and the license holding company to where, like a license agreement between the two, that's perhaps disclosable depending on the state. And a lot of regulators don't just take your word for looking at like an operating agreement or bylaws or a shareholders agreement. They want to see the actual humans behind it, and then they'll vet those humans. And like I said, it depends on how far that will go back. In Colorado, I've seen the Marijuana Enforcement Division dig for 3 months on one person, and just going back and saying, okay, I see in your bank records, you have this entity transferred money to you. What's that? So that, it could be really intense. It could be not as intense. It could be something similar to, and I'm not barred in Oklahoma, so I don't have a lot to say, but, a little bit more flexibility there where you don't have a lot of disclosure requirements, perhaps. So I think how you set up your organizational structure from the get-go will inform this discussion moving forward. So where do you want to hold your IP? Where do you want to hold your brand? Do you want to take on investors and endorsers? Do you want them at the IP holding company level? Do you want them at another sort of subsidiary? Do you want them in the licensed entity? So things of that nature are important to have at the forefront, but can also be had after you've been operating for a while. It's something that you can reorganize when maybe you're at the right time where you say, okay, I want to take on investors. I want to take on someone to endorse. I want to give them some equity. How do we do this?
And I think part of your question, it's a huge burden to bring on lawyers or staff, even outside counsel, for limited engagements for young companies. And when you have a limited cash flow or no cash flow and you're just working off of investments, you really want to make sure that you put as much as you can into operations to make sure the business is going. And a lot of people avoid that. And I don't want to sound judgmental when I say, you have to do this, you have to do that. When you're running a business, you have to make a lot of tough decisions. But in terms of a one-size-fits-all template or something close to it, I don't think it exists. I mean, it might be better to find that than nothing, but sometimes it's actually worse. But whenever you're dealing with intellectual property rights or rights of publicity, you do want to have something in writing here. Just to give you an idea, I've litigated cases where you even had attorneys working on these deals, but didn't have a lot of experience, and they're problematic. And very often they're sloppily done. They have, clauses that conflict with each other, that it doesn't look like, the person who drafted the first half of the agreement and looked at it and, someone else drafted the second half. But there can be problems. Now, when it comes to the overall bang for your buck, it does make sense to have an experienced deal attorney put it together with you. And usually, like our firm, we'll have our templates that we use. and then we'll go over the template with you and say these are the provisions that usually get changed the most. So the cost isn't that high compared to what you get out of it. And it's not just the fact that if there's any disagreement, usually it's going to be taken care of. So instead of having a very public dispute or even an arbitration, which can be expensive, every side knows who's going to win or lose if a discussion comes up. And so it saves a lot of time, and it's not as expensive as people think to do these deals. And to tailor make it to your situation, it's well worth the money. Well,
That's a good question.
Well, it is a good question. I mean, my impression is that nonprofits will try and leverage their charitable status to try and get the celebrity to do it for much of on the same basis. But with regard to the FTC, I don't think there is any difference. Your advertising still has to be honest. All of those things apply. But in terms of trying to, there are celebrities that will appear on documentaries and do things and not charge any fee. And so be more willing to do it from that. But if your question is is there a change in the regulations with regard to what's required in advertising, I don't think there's any. I'm not aware of any.
That's okay. I'm gonna just yell at you. It's been really lovely to be up here moderating this conversation, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your time at Angelic. And
And, yes, and by the way, feel free to come up to us afterwards, and we're happy to share our contact information if you have to run. And if you've got a question for me and you didn't think of it, or just my email is jzuber@zuberlawler.com. Just shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to follow up with you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey now, don't go anywhere just yet. Thank you all very much. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. We're gonna have to fight for a spot here, huh? People everywhere. All right. I'm having a great time. I hope you all are enjoying yourselves. We've got an international panel coming up next. This is something that's personally very near and dear to my heart. We're talking about global topics. International panel. Also, I want to give you a shout out, homie. I heard your great questions yesterday, by the way. So thank you. You're cranking. He's here the whole day. I like that. All killer, no filler. All right. Yeah, we've got this is a call to action. If you're on the international panel, now's your time to shine. We've got actually a 5-minute buffer, so if people want to decompress a little bit, that should be fine. So I'll use these 5 minutes as an opportunity to practice for my set tonight.
Bust it.
Woo.